you this, but I always wanted to ask you. Why? How come harmonica and piano, or what was it first, piano or was harmonica first?
It was the piano first. I started playing piano, getting my first piano lessons when I was about 8.5 years old, growing up in New York, and my I had begged my parents, please, please, I want to play the piano, and they always said, no, you're too young, you're too young, you're too young. So I must have been storing up a lot of thoughts, ideas, whatever, because after my third piano lesson, I started improvising and making up my own stuff.
Seriously?
Oh yeah, and it sounded good. And I was every day I came home from school, I would sit down at the piano and improvise for like a half hour. And of course, my parents didn't have a tape recorder, and so who knows what it sounded like? I have no idea, but I know that everything I played was coherent, you know. And
Wow.
so then I started going to the Manhattan School of Music on Saturday afternoons, taking piano lessons and music theory class, so that I got a nice basic grounding in music there. And we also would perform if I played a piece well enough and my teachers thought it sounded good enough. They had a thing where every week there was an hour of students performing. So it got me used to playing for audiences, you know. And
Wow.
so, yeah, I studied piano for 4 years, and then I I started getting interested in pop music, you know, and rock and roll and folk music, and you know, the stuff was on the radio and things my friends would play for me. Uh, and then later, I started, you know, going to live shows, and then I got turned on to blues, which is
Okay.
how the harmonica started. And shortly after that, jazz. Uh,
Oh,
so uh, there were a bunch of us who had a band in high school, and we played for dances and stuff. And the drummer in the band was a really talented musician. He started as a classical violinist, taught himself how to play drums, and then he taught himself how to play harmonica, and sounded really, really good. And I thought, you know, wow, that's really cool. The idea of something you could fit in your pocket instead of having to go to this giant instrument and find one, you know, and plus the ability to bend notes. As a piano
wow.
player, this was the big frustration. You can't bend a note. It's so frustrating. So I went to Manny's Music on West 48th Street in New York. It must have been 1969,
Wow.
I guess. And I spent $2.25 on a harmonica. And I took the subway to my friend's house. I said, "Show me how you do these, how you play the blues and how you bend those notes." And he said, "I can't really show you. It's like this thing, it's inside your mouth and it's by feel." I said, "What do you mean you can't show me?" And so it was very frustrating, but I finally had a breakthrough in September of that year where I just somehow started bending notes. So that I was 18. And so
Wow.
already had been playing piano for 10 years, you know.
But also jazz piano at that time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
I was starting to write jazz tunes, and this is when I was at Northwestern University. I also became the pianist in their jazz band.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and that was the first time that I ever saw an official chart. You know, until then I had been just listening to tons of records and memorizing stuff, and I knew some basic chord names, but I had never seen a 13 sharp 11 before. And you know, like, what does that even mean? Where's 13? And so I would like count up 13 notes, and I went, oh, it's this. Oh, it's a sixth, but it's up there. And then, you know, everything, nobody showed me anything. I just had
Yeah.
to figure it out myself. Uh, but I was already kind of, since I'd been improvising for so long in all these different styles, I knew more than I thought I knew, but I just didn't know what things were called,
Yeah.
you know.
Ah.
And then I started studying things. You know, people told me you really should learn about modes. I went, what are modes? And so I went to the library at the school and got a book out that explained the Greek modes. And I went, oh, that's so simple. Oh, that's why I like to play in D minor so much. Dorian mode. Oh, I
That's
had
so
no
cool.
idea. No classical theory people.
Yeah,
They weren't teaching modal stuff to kids
exactly.
unless you had Bartok as your teacher or something, you
Yeah.
know. Uh, so I just learned things in my own way, and you know, when I picked up the harmonica and was able to bend a few notes, all that blues stuff,
Yeah.
which that's why I wanted to play. It was a thrill to be able to do that, uh, and to be able to express myself with a wind instrument. I felt like it changed my personality. I was suddenly like almost like a new person,
Mhm.
being able to express myself musically like this. And
Yeah.
so I just took it with me everywhere. And anytime I'd walk into a place that had an echo, like a hallway or a tunnel underneath a road or whatever, I would just take it out and play. And all harmonica players, we're all like this, uh, you know. And but then what happened was I started realizing that there were notes that were not on the instrument, and this
Okay.
this deeply frustrated me. I thought, what this is crazy. How could there be notes missing? It's a musical instrument. It must have all the notes. And so, I would sit in my dorm room and practice and try to play scales, not just the blues licks, and apply the jazz theory I was learning to the instrument. Realized that I could play some modal things, um, but there were still 6 notes missing from on the instrument. It's like going to a practice room and finding a piano with broken keys, which
Yeah.
happens. And then
Yeah.
you go, "Oh, this is terrible." You go to more rooms and oh, here's one where all the keys work, and you play that one. But this was like
Oh,
so
yeah.
incredibly frustrating. So I figured out that on the bottom of the harmonica, you can bend the draw notes because the draw reeds are higher than the blow reeds on the bottom 6 holes. And on the top 4 holes, the way this weird instrument is made, the blow reeds are higher than the draw reeds, so you can bend the blows. So on the top,
Okay.
all those things. And on the
Yeah.
bottom is, and I'm playing a G because that was the first key harmonica I bought. Was
Ah,
G.
wow. How cool.
Most people will, you know, play a C harmonica. I went into the store and the guy said, "Yeah, the G is lower or whatever." I said, "Fine, I'll buy a G." Uh, and so I didn't know anything. Um, and so then I started thinking, okay, there's these places where there aren't any notes. They're missing. Like if you play the middle octave,
Hmm.
you can do bends, but you can't get a B flat. You
Yeah.
can get that's gone. There's no C sharp and there's no F.
Yeah.
So right smack dab in the middle of the instrument, there are 3 broken keys. So I thought, this is crazy. They must be there. So you can only bend the draw notes on the bottom. So I thought, what happens if I try to bend the blow notes? That's logic, right? If it doesn't work on the draw, there's only 2 ways you can blow. You can inhale and exhale. So,
Yeah.
so on the top, so if you try doing it on the 6th hole, I'm sitting in my dorm room, and one day, and it bends and it disappears. One day, the F popped out. And I thought, that's amazing. There it is. And I'm doing this backwards thing. Maybe all the other places on the instrument where the notes are missing, if I do the same technique, I can get them. So I tried the 5th hole, and there's a C sharp,
Yeah.
and the 4th hole, there's the B flat. So now the middle octave,
We have it. Yeah.
and so it's all there. And then I found the other ones. There's 3 more. There's one more on the 1st hole, and And then on the top, I figured there's the missing notes there. I have to try to draw to get them.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I have a 3-octave chromatic scale on this instrument.
But like before, have people done this on diatonic harmonic or no?
Well, I didn't know that, but there was one recording made in 1931 where a guy hit one of those notes.
By accident? Or?
No, on purpose.
Oh.
And then there was a guy named Will Scarlett in the 1960s who tried playing like that for a while with a group called Hatuna, which you probably heard of.
Yeah.
And he just didn't really like the way it sounded that much, and he didn't like the way it felt to do these techniques, and he stopped doing it. This was about 2 years before I started. And there are 1 or 2 other recordings of somebody playing one of those notes, but nobody took it seriously the way I did, because being a jazz pianist, I wanted to make this instrument like a piano.
Yeah.
And so after a while, I realized that when I close my eyes, because the instrument's invisible, you can't see it. It has no fingerings. It's not like a guitar neck or a saxophone with keys. So my eyes are closed. I'm going, what am I hearing? I mean, what am I seeing? I realized I was seeing the piano keyboard.
So when you improvise on harmonica, you picture a piano keyboard?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Because you can't see anything, and so in order to quantify these notes, in order to give them identities, like definite pitches, I have to see a definite pitch.
Right. Yeah.
So I do that all. I should turn the camera down so people can see the keyboard. I forgot to do that.
That's okay.
I can move it. I hope. There's a lot of chords connected here. Man, this is my lifeline to the world here, this computer. I never thought I'd be so grateful to Steve Jobs, but he's created a lifeline here.
Yeah.
So now you can see me a little bit.
Yeah, we can.
Better.
It's cool. Yeah.
So now I have. And that's
why you can then do that at the same time also, right?
Yes. And I self-accompany myself, on tunes. Whoops, we've got to get the damper pedal. It's down there somewhere. So this is the right hand, left hand, but I can also hold it in this hand. So I only started doing that years later, self-accompaniment and unison playing and all this stuff when I was in bands where we would record something where I would play both instruments, and realized that in order for us to perform live, I had to do this stuff on stage. So I would try to record things in such a way that it didn't sound like an overdub, so that I at least had a chance of being able to make the thing sound, realistic on stage, similar to the recording. Anyway, that's how I made the transition from being a pianist to multi-instrumentalist, which is one of those funny words. Which implies that you're not very good on anything.
Oh my God! But you started in high school with piano, right?
No, when I was 8 years old.
I mean, with jazz piano, like who did you listen to as? Which pianists?
Well, the first thing I ever heard, and a lot of Americans will tell you the same thing, Ramsey Lewis had a tune called "The In Crowd" that was like a hit record. It was like a hit record for the original guy who did it, which was a vocal, and then he had an instrumental version.
He's still out.
Do you remember that? It was
I heard it, yeah.
it was recorded live in a club, and it was funky and groovy, and he sort of like Horace Silver's playing,
Yeah.
and a lot of guys. That was the introduction to jazz piano.
Oh, okay.
So I learned it from hearing it on the radio and would play it. And, then I started imitating all the rock and roll stuff. And of course, many of the keyboard players in rock bands were listening to jazz. And then later, and then blues, right? But then when I got into jazz, I had a kind of a religious experience. The first jazz album I heard consciously that changed my life was Crescent, John Coltrane.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's...
And somebody recommended that I listen to it. I listened to it, and it blew my 17-year-old mind.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I said, oh my God, how are they doing this? Plus, the spiritual beauty of the music overwhelmed me. I don't know if I cried, but it was something close to it. I had never felt that way about music ever before. And I would say that John Coltrane kind of became my religion after that.
Did you ever transcribe Coltrane?
I would imitate, listening, so that I could sing a lot of his solos.
Oh, wow.
I internalized, not just Coltrane, but of course McCoy Tyner's. McCoy Tyner's playing blew my mind, as did Elvin Jones playing.
Yeah, the quartet is brilliant.
And then later, I got much more of an appreciation for what Jimmy Garrison was doing, which was incredible. But at the time, I didn't quite understand the role of the jazz bass and exactly how he was playing. So I just wore this. I bought the record, and I wore it out, and I listened to it over and over again. And then I wanted to go hear some live jazz after this. I said, this is like and I found out that Coltrane had died the year before. Yeah. I said, well, the other guys are still alive. And I looked in the newspaper, and Elvin Jones was playing a concert at the Museum of Modern Art Sculpture Garden. So two friends of mine who also liked music, actually the drummer, I think it was the drummer, we went. And so my first live jazz experience was hearing Elvin Jones and Roland Kirk play together. And it ruined my life. It set me down this path that I've been on ever since. Just seeing Elvin, just watching him play, it was like, he just ruined my appreciation for any other drummer, probably for like the next 30 years. It's like, yeah, this guy's good, this guy's great, but Elvin was like a god to me. This is not quite human, but he did, and the innovations that he did. I mean, it was no one ever sounded like him before. I mean, people sort of partially sounded like him, but nobody ever did the stuff that he dreamed up.
Do you remember some other concerts from that period when he started?
Well, yeah. I mean, after that, I started listening to jazz radio station in New York, and they had a really great one called WLIB, and the great pianist Billy Taylor was the program director.
Oh, okay.
So they played all the best jazz albums, and so I'd listen to the show, and I'd write down the names of these albums, and I'd go to the record store and buy them. I started listening to like all the Blue Note albums, and even though I was not even 18, they would let you into clubs in New York, not like Chicago. And then the drinking age was 18, actually, at that time. Yeah. And so I used to go to the Vanguard and the Village Gate and all these places. And, of course, I got to hear Sonny Rollins and Miles Davis and Monk, Bill Evans and Phil Woods and, oh, my God, tons and tons of people, just so many. So I just immersed myself in the music as much as I could and just sat there and just soaked it in. Yeah. Before I went to school in Chicago, And then, and afterwards, I moved back to New York for a year and a half and heard a lot more. But in Chicago, when I was at Northwestern, they had two incredible jazz musicians leading the jazz band. First was Bunky Green.
Oh yeah. Oh, Bunky's amazing.
Bunky
The
is,
underrated saxophone player, man.
I mean, just sort of the missing link between Eric Dolphy and Ornette and Bird and Train, and he's like just unique. And I remember the first time he played a solo with the band, I'm sitting there at the piano with my jaw hanging down, going, "Who is this guy?" Because Chicago, there were a bunch of players here who were amazing, who just because the fact that they lived here, they didn't get the big recording contracts with the established jazz labels, and people didn't know about it. And then later, Bunky had to go, whatever, and Rufus Reid was leading it. So I didn't do too badly, rubbing shoulders with those two guys. It was inspiring. And of course, everyone else in the band was a music major. I wasn't. I wasn't even in music school, and my reading was terrible. And all those guys, you put a chart in front of them like a German big band orchestra. They just read everything right because they're all classical musicians. But I knew how to solo, and I could swing, And so it was a very, very good experience for me, and I learned a tremendous amount in the short amount of time that I did that. And I also started a band with some friends here, and we started playing, and I wrote more tunes. So anyway, yeah.
Amazing. But when did your love for other cultures start? I mean, I remember when we were on tour in car. I just thought about it today. I think we've listened to everything from Dixie Drex to some, I don't know, Afghanistan to some Israeli traditional music to, I remember, I mean, I know you're like a kid for me who's like in a huge playground of all this music, and you're just like, oh, I mean, where did this love for all these different kinds of, let's say Trio Globo stuff or influenced or whatever, when did this start?
Shortly after that, when I moved back, I moved to New York City for a year and a half. I did a lot of playing on the street, and I started learning other instruments also. Oh. This is something a lot of people don't know, but I started playing tenor and soprano and flute.
Really?
And mandolin, and African balafon, and a lot of hand percussion, dumbek, and other things too. And because after I got pretty good on the harmonica, after I'd been playing harmonica for about a year, I started thinking, wow, there's all these other instruments that I love. I wonder if I could learn how to play those too, and what that would feel like to play a saxophone.
Yeah.
Like John Coltrane's my hero. What would it be like for me to touch the sacred tenor saxophone? So somebody lent me a tenor, and I bought a fingering chart, and I started figuring out how to play. And the same thing with the flute and string instruments. A friend gave me a mandolin, et cetera, et cetera. And like you said, a kid on a playground, and that's the way I felt. And every time I'd play another instrument, it opened up this whole other world of expression for me. And so most keyboard players, especially in the early and mid 70s, started getting into playing synthesizers, and I never was interested in that until way, way later, because it's like, push a button and, change waveforms or whatever. It was all technology. I really like instruments, and I felt that playing all these different instruments, I could learn so much about music this way and be able to watch a group play. I know if I'm watching the bass player, I know exactly what he's playing because I also play electric bass, and if I'm watching a saxophone player, I can tell what he's playing. And also I learned a tremendous amount about the overtone series, playing the tenor, which I had studied about it, but I had never played an instrument that used it. Piano is such a machine. You don't have to know anything about the overtone series to play piano, but to play any wind instrument, you have to understand its function. especially brass instruments.
Yeah.
And so getting involved in other instruments, it's a funny thing. I don't tell this story too often, but there was a blues that Coltrane played where he played this weird little trill. And I thought, that's not from blues or jazz. That's from someplace else. I wonder where that's from. And then the whole interest in world music very early on started getting more popular, like Bulgarian Women's Chorus.
Yeah.
And Non-Such Records started having a label called the Non-Such Explorer Series, where they put out many, I don't know, like 100 albums from all different countries. And so I had friends who were interested in this stuff, and I would go to the library and get out records from different countries. And I just got fascinated by all the different kinds of music that I had never heard before. And at the same time as I was growing less enchanted with American music, because jazz was changing over to fusion, and rock seemed like it was getting kind of sterile. And there was this great wealth of incredible, amazing amount of stuff from all these other cultures. Indian music, Balinese music. I was crazy about Balinese gamelan music. And all different kinds of African music, North African music, Central African music, and Eastern European music. And I went to a folk festival and saw some Balkan folk dancers dancing to 7/8 and 11/8, and it blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, what rhythms are these? It was like psychedelic for me. I could not tell where one was.
Yeah.
And so then I started buying albums of Bulgarian music and starting to figure this stuff out. This was like mid 70s.
Oh, wow, that's early. Shit, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so anyway, one thing led to another, and I started a band called the Balkan Rhythm Band in 1979 to play music from Bulgaria and Macedonia. And I got a whole bunch of my jazz musician friends interested in this, really good players, and they were really intrigued by this music. And there were two singers who had studied in Balkan folk music camps, and they sang in all these different languages. And we were kind of popular around Chicago and actually put out an album on Flying Fish Records, which was a major independent record label in Chicago. In 1982, I think it came out. So at the same time, I was also really into Afro-Cuban music and started getting into Brazilian music. And I joined a band called Chevere de Chicago, which was a mixture of American and Latino musicians doing a lot of original compositions, a blend of Afro-Cuban and Brazilian music.
That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. And at the same time, I also started my own jazz quintet called No Bad Vibes, and I put out that CD recently. I discovered the original recordings from 1980 to 83.
Wow.
And
Okay.
really good. I have the CD here. Yeah.
You have to send me this card.
Yeah, I will.
Check it out.
No Bad Vibes, it stands for.
Wow. Okay.
And so I was doing all this different stuff in Chicago, and just like, Bulgarian music and Latin music, and playing jazz with the older guys, more traditional stuff, and then playing the modern stuff, all my original compositions with my quintet. And then I started getting into getting hired to play on commercials, because there are very few harmonica players who can read music.
I can't believe it.
And most of them lived in New York or LA. And there I was in Chicago, which had at the time a thriving scene in commercial music. And people found out about me because a lot of the guys who were in the scene were jazz musicians. And so I would sit in and, boy, this kid can really play harmonica. Hey, can you read? Can you play country music? I was, sure. What country do you want to hear from? And so I started getting hired to do that. And I ended up playing on, I don't know, like 1,000 recording sessions playing.
Yeah. When I check your discography, it's like I think I checked it on Sunday, and I was like, I mean, I did it like, before we played together. I was like, yeah, what? You play there? And like, you played on albums of some of my heroes, like, I don't know, Donald Fagen and Paul Simon. And, you know, how were these experiences? Let's say Paul Simon or Donald Fagen, how did this happen? Did they contact you, or like did the labels contact you, or?
No, they did. They did personally. Paul actually called me. Yeah, it was, but that was through actually. This is years later. Of course, we're talking about. I just got up chronologically to the early '80s, but at my first major recording that I did was with Paquito de Rivera. I played 2 tunes on one of his albums, and I was touring with him at the time as a pianist, but I would get one feature on harmonica. And then I put out my first album under my own name, which is called Harmonica Jazz, where I played Coltrane tunes and Charlie Parker and my own stuff. And then people started finding out about me. And then the Flecktones, of course, and we can go back to that. But I'll answer your question. So many years passed, and so I was pretty well known. So Donald Fagen, someone from his management got in touch with me, and they flew me to New York to play on the Morph the Cat album.
Yeah, and that's such a cool one.
A little bit intimidated, and Donald was pretty nervous, making a solo album. It was only the second one he made after the Nightclub. But I walked in and, I felt real comfortable playing. Of course, the tracks sounded amazing, and I, I did my thing, and he loved it. And we started talking. And it turns out, of course, he's a huge jazz fan.
Yeah.
And we both bought our jazz albums at the same record store on 8th Street in the Village.
Seriously?
Yeah, he was a kid from New Jersey who would come into the city. I was a kid from Queens who would come into the city. The city is Manhattan, to hear jazz, to go to the Village Vanguard and sit there and drink a Coke, and of course he was also smoking a cigarette, and so Donald was like, he haunted the Village when he was 15 and 16 years old and just soaked up the essence of New York. And I put him on the same level musically as Thelonious Monk. I just think he's a absolutely distinct original composer.
Yeah, definitely.
With his own voice, and just amazing. He's just a natural, and so we just really actually hit it off, which I never expected. And then he asked me to sit in with him a few times, and so I ended up playing live with his band and with Steely Dan about 3 times.
Seriously?
So, yeah.
Wow.
Great experiences.
That's one of my favorite bands, Steely Dan. That's like
live. They are just absolutely killing. Yeah. And Freddy Washington, the bass player, I know him from we played with Kenny Loggins together.
Oh yeah.
And so I knew Freddie, so that was like a great warm vibe just walking on the stage, It's different from not knowing anyone. Although I kind of love being the hired gun who walks in and nobody knows who you are, and then you play and then everyone knows.
Yeah.
So it was great. And then the Paul Simon experience, that was a whole different thing through Jamie Haddad. And he did an album where he was playing in a lot of odd time meters, and he wanted to hear harmonica on this tune that was in 11. And Jamie said, well, there's only one harmonica player I know who can play in odd time meters, and this is the guy you should hire. And so, Paul called me up and we had conversations about it. And I said, okay, sure. And it was an interesting experience. Yeah, because he kind of wants you to come up with stuff that fits, but it's not like a normal experience like playing with Donald or like other like stars that I've played with, because the way he comes up with lyrics is as a result of some sort of alchemy that happens with the music that inspires him to come up with lyrics. And so when I walked in the studio, I said, are there any lyrics for the song? He said, no. And I'm going like, well, I'm used to playing with singers, and like, that's my thing. I love playing with singers and playing fills around them and stuff. Well, what do you really want me to do here? I mean, It was challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But he basically just wanted me to play kind of rhythmic ideas. And so it ended up being fine, but we were supposed to do a second tune. I'll tell you the story, and it was pretty funny. I said, well, this one had a section in 5, a section in 6, and a section in 7, something like that. I said, well, does this one have lyrics? And he said, yeah. I said, oh. He said, but I haven't recorded it yet. And I went, oh, okay. And he said, would you like me to record a vocal track for you? And I said, Paul Simon's asked me if you, I said, sure. And he goes, it's just a pilot vocal. He said, yeah, throw up a 58. And he walks in the studio. I mean, he was really nice. He walks in the studio, he sings his thing, and I'm sitting there in the control room, and my heart is sinking because it's like, you're a literary guy, James Joyce.
Yeah.
It was like that. There were like 5 million words, and without a breath. And I'm going, oh my God, this is even worse. There's no room to play at all. What am I going to say? I'm feeling terrible about this, that I even asked him to do this. And so he walks back in the control room. It turned out he didn't like one of the sections of the tune after he sang it. And he turned to the engineer and said, I really don't like the part in 6. Why don't you edit that out? And then he turns to me and he goes, I guess you're not going to be playing on this tune today.
Shit.
But he was totally cool. He said, I'm sorry I wasn't more prepared, and you're a great player and everything like that. So it was a weird experience, and not something that I'm particularly proud of, like the way I am with the Donald Fagen thing, but it was very fascinating to see the way he works.
Yeah.
And the other person that I got to play with, who I really loved, was Dolly Parton.
That's what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you that because you read your discography and then it's like Dolly Parton, this kind of sticks out. I'm like,
Yes, she does. Anyway, boom. She is a delight. Well, being a harmonica player, of course, the two worlds that are most associated with diatonic harmonica are blues and country. Yeah. And I can play all that stuff really well, and bluegrass and all sorts of other things. So a good friend of mine, C.J. Vanston, who does all the music for the Christopher Guest movies, he played with Spinal Tap and Best in Show and A Mighty Wind and all these movies. He was arranging a movie soundtrack that Dolly was in the movie and wrote all the music for. And so he's the one who hired me, and we're still very close friends. And so I walked in the studio after playing a very late night gig with the Flecktones. We were on tour of the West Coast, and I was exhausted, long taxi ride. So Dolly met me at the door of the studio. Well, hello, and she was like beautiful, and she's about maybe 5'1". I mean, she's tiny, short, and I'm so tall. And she complimented my playing. She said, "Oh, CJ's told me all these wonderful things about you," and I'm going, "Oh, And then she looks at me and goes, "You hungry?" I went, "Well, yeah, I really haven't eaten anything." And she said, "Well, how'd y'all like a little Southern white trash lunch? I just cooked myself up some fried green tomatoes." And so I ate Dolly's cooking, and then I played on a bunch of tunes, and it was just a wonderful experience, man.
Yeah.
She's just such a beautiful human being. And I felt like I was walking on a little cloud about a foot above the ground when I left the studio.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing, man. That's so cool.
So like that's one of the things that I enjoy doing is fitting in and fitting in a way and standing out in a way in all these different styles of music,
But you mentioned before Paquito de Rivera, right? How did this happen through Rivera? Because you're being or no?
Indirectly. That was a very interesting thing. I was sitting home and the phone rang, and it was Tito Puente's road manager, who also played bass trumpet with him. And he said, "Is this Howard Levy?" I said, "Yeah." Well, we have a problem here. Our pianist got stuck in New York City, snowed in by a huge snowstorm. It was Jorge Dalto, fantastic pianist, who's actually good friends with the drummer in Chevrolet, because he used to live in Chicago, believe it or not.
Oh,
Jorge lived in Chicago. He's passed on now. Just a wonderful musician. And we're desperate for a piano player tonight. And everyone we asked said that we should call you. So to play with Tito Puente, I said, my God, who's in the band? And so Paquito was playing saxophone with Tito, and great bass player, oh God, Charlie Rodriguez, amazing,
yeah.
and Jerry Gonzalez on congas.
Oh,
These are the greatest Latin jazz musicians in the world.
definitely, yeah.
And Paquito had always been a favorite of mine since I heard the Irakere recording.
Yeah.
So this is like a dream. But I had two other gigs that day. I'll just make the story short. My second gig ended 5 minutes before their gig started. And I couldn't get out of these gigs. I mean, they were with a great tenor player, Chicago tenor player, and I did not want to screw him over.
Yeah.
And I just said if we could end our second gig a few minutes early, it was right around the corner from where Tito was playing. And I knew that Latin gigs always started late. So I ran in. He had a little cassette player and a pair of headphones, and he stuck them on my head. He said, "Yeah, the pianist. Oh, Tito, yeah, okay. Here's the first tune, and here's the chart." And I looked at it and go, "Cool, I can play it, no problem." And I said, "What about the rest of the tunes?" He said, "Everything else is just head charts, standards, Latin standards." I went, "Okay." So that's how I walked on stage and we played, and I played my solo and everyone cheered, and I felt like I was dreaming. It was so beautiful playing with these guys. It was perfect, And so Paquito heard me play, and we ended up playing 2 nights. And then a few months later, he was playing in Chicago, and I went by the club and I sat in with him. And then he started hiring me when he was playing in the Midwest on piano and some harmonica. So that's how that started. And I ended up touring in Europe with him once, and it was my first European tour on 86, I think it was.
86, yeah.
And then after that, and I was still, of course, playing with all of these people in Chicago and recording more and more stuff. And then that's when I met Bela Fleck after that.
Yeah. Where did you meet Bela then? How did that happen?
That was in Winnipeg, Canada. They had this huge festival, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, that had about, 10 stages with over 100 bands from all over the world, not just folk music. This is like everything. And so I was playing with a very interesting acoustic music group called Trapezoid.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women in Trapezoid, her name is Lorraine Dweezy, she kept saying to me, "Howard, you and Bela have to play together." And Bela was playing with Newgrass Revival, this great band that he was in for years. And she, unbeknownst to me, she was walking up to Bela and saying, "Bela, you have to play with Howard Levy." And so it was at a party after one of the concerts, and she dragged me down the hall to where Bela was sitting, sort of shy by himself, and said, "Howard, Bela, play." And we ended up jamming till 7 a.m.
Seriously? Wow.
And so when Bela got asked to do a TV show in Louisville, public television show, he had met Victor Wooten and his brother Roy, who's known as Future Man, the percussionist. And he thought, well, this guy wants me to put together an unusual band. I think if I had Howard Levy and the Wooten brothers, that's about as unusual as it gets.
It is.
So they rehearsed, and whoops, sorry, my feet just got tangled. Oh, God, what's going on here? There we go. And so I flew down there, and basically we played the show on no rehearsal, just a tech rehearsal at the TV studio.
You improvised, or?
Well, he sent me a cassette, and so I learned some tunes, but, well, the real story is there was a power outage on Bela's block when I flew to Nashville, and so we couldn't play. There's no electric bass. There's no electricity for the drums. I walked in and said, like, we can't play. Just drive to Louisville and we'll just like pray that we have enough time to rehearse and sound check. And we did. And when we played, the audience went nuts. And you can still find it on YouTube. The show is called the Lonesome Pine Special.
Okay, check this out.
And that's when we all thought maybe this is a band, and we got together, played a few more gigs, and we realized, yes, it is a band. How about recording? And then Warner Brothers Nashville picked up the recording. Bela made it on his own dime, you know. And then
which year was that?
Let's see, the TV show was probably 88.
Oh,
and we recorded the album in 89, I think. And then we started touring. And I think the album came out in the spring of 90. But we also filmed a video. Warner Brothers were very smart. They said, these guys look as interesting as they sound. And so the first Flecktone video is actually really great. And I hate music videos, but it's really good. The Sinister Minister. And
that's like yeah, I love it.
Exactly. And so we were in America's living rooms before the album came out. And we ended up getting asked to do all the major network TV shows and everything. And this was a life-changing thing. You know, suddenly I'm nominated for a Grammy. Yeah. You know, we have several Grammys we got nominated for. Didn't win in the beginning. So toured all over the world with that group. In the early days, mostly America. And I did that through the end of 1992. So it was like a little more than three years of touring. And I just didn't want to do it anymore. It was so much, and it was just getting to be more and more and more. And I have so many different musical interests that if we had toured less, like compartmentalized it, then I could have done my other stuff. But I felt like my identity was disappearing, and that I was a Flecktone, and that's all I was. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. So
but you also wrote music for the Flecktones, right? I think you played some of your tunes also, right?
Yeah. But in the beginning, not so much in the beginning. Yeah. Although we actually did play some of my tunes in the beginning, but didn't record them on the CDs. Yeah, that's another story. But so I quit, and then that's when I started playing more in Europe. And also I got the gig with Kenny Loggins. So 1993 was an amazing year where I started playing with Rabbi Abu Khalil and Michael Riesler and Kenny Loggins and Trio Globo, all at the same time.
That's when Trio Globo started?
Yeah.
So it was quite late. Okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, late in terms of, I thought it's already in the 80s. Okay.
No. And so my life was transformed musically by all of these rich cross-cultural experiences, which I just thrive on that kind of a thing. And playing in Europe so much with Europeans, it was, it became one of my favorite things to do, as you know. And instead of being an American on tour with an American group in Europe, which is another experience, it's great, but, it's a different kind of cross-fertilization of ideas, cultures, playing with people from Europe and Middle East, which is what I was doing, and then going back home and playing with the very top levels of the pop music world. Kenny Loggins, great musician, fantastic band. Oh, everyone in that band.
You toured with him, right? Or you didn't only do albums? Yeah, you toured with him.
Yeah, 2 albums and toured for 2 years.
But he was huge, right, in the States? Or?
Oh yeah. Kenny is, Loggins and Messina were like superstars, and then Kenny on his own became one. And, we played very large venues, and he was an absolutely amazing performer because it was equal amounts of performance and genuine soul and heart and amazing vocals. His singing was incredible.
Really cool. Yeah.
And the amount of attention to detail to make all the arrangements really the optimal thing for each song. It was inspiring to me, and I started writing things that were kind of inspired by that.
Uh-huh.
Some of my tunes that I didn't record these. Only recorded one of them, which is called Fade to Black on the album I did with Chris Siebold. That's called Art Plus Adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
I have.
Yeah, I listened to it the other day on Deezer. Yeah.
I have it here somewhere because I eventually ended up starting my own record label because I had kind of a weird experience where I was signed to a contract with a major label, but I never did the album for many reasons, which was mostly my fault. And I don't really want to go into it, but it was just, I had so much turmoil in my life that I just couldn't figure out how to do it. That's basically it. And I was also busy with other things that I loved, Trio Globo and touring with Rabi Abu Khalil and all this stuff. And it just, going to New York and recording on a jazz label, I just couldn't figure out how to fit all of these different pieces together. And my marriage was falling apart too, my first marriage. And so it was just a lot of different things happened. It made it really tough. And so I kept doing all of these things. I mean, except for Kenny, that only lasted for 2 years. He started touring less, and then he would ask me to do gigs that were like in the middle of other things I was doing. And at first there were no conflicts at all. It was like a miracle. And then it's like, geez, I got a gig with my own group playing at a college.
Yeah.
And then Kenny Loggins wants me to play with him. And am I going to screw up my reputation by breaking a contract with a college where there's going to be 1,000 people hearing me play? Or am I, it was a tough choice. And after a while I said, Kenny, I just can't do this. I can't, jump and fly here for one gig and jeopardize my, lose my reputation, get people pissed off at me. And so then I guess I just kept playing and writing music, and then I ended up composing my Harmonica Concerto.
One question about how do you approach composition?
Well,
do you usually write, you have a project in your mind, what you're going to write or who? Or you just basically write because kind of you write or,
Both. I would say that, I have the soul of an improviser. And then composing usually needs a setting. There has to be a reason to compose.
Yeah.
So something with more structure there has to be some group you have in mind to write for. Like Trio Globo or my quintet or just someone approaching me with something, we want you to do this. And so, it's a combination of both things. And so the Harmonica Concerto was really interesting because all previous concertos for harmonicas were composed for the chromatic harmonica, the one with the button. That doesn't require any special embouchure to get all the notes. It's just a coordination of blow and draw and push the button in and out. And it sounds totally different. It's like a cousin of the diatonic harmonica.
Sure.
It's really more different than similar in a way. And so this orchestra called me and said they were interested in having me perform a harmonica concerto with them. And I said, well, all of those pieces are written for the chromatic. I don't play the chromatic, even though I do know how, but there's no way I'm going to get up on stage and play it. And that's actually a very long story because one time I did perform a chromatic harmonica concerto.
Really?
I practiced for 6 months and I played it, and it's not terrible. I'll send you an MP3.
It's not terrible. That's probably
it's not
really
great.
good.
It's not great, but it's not terrible. And after that, I said, I was very brave to do this, but put the chromatic back in the case, and that's it. So I said, but if you'd like, to this orchestra, I could write one for myself.
Oh.
And they said, well, that's an interesting thought. We'll get back to you. And I thought, I'll never hear from them. So I forgot about it. And then a few months later, I got a phone call from the manager of the orchestra saying, yeah, Howard, this is, blah, blah, blah. And we're very interested in having you compose a harmonica concerto to perform with us next year. And I went, you are? I don't know how to write a harmonica concerto. I didn't say that to them. It's like, so I had written one piece that's on my classical CD called Suite for Harmonica and Chamber Orchestra. It's a suite for harmonica and chamber ensemble called Harmonium.
Yeah.
And it's really pretty good.
Yeah, no, you showed me that in the car. It's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of odd time meters in it. It's kind of like a snapshot.
You wrote all the arrangements?
Oh, yeah.
Also for strings and everything, or?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And that was before Sibelius.
Oh, yeah. But it was when, people knew about the music notation software, and some people were good at it then, but I just could not do it. And so I just wrote with pencil and paper.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, that's really the only way I know how to write. And so I wrote my chamber piece, and a woman who was a fantastic copyist copied it with an amazing hand. It looks like a machine, And so I performed that in 1995. And the premiere concert of that is what's on the CD. Where is the CD? Oh, here it is. My classical CD.
Yeah.
And so when I did the harmonica concerto, and I played it with an orchestra called the Illinois Philharmonic, which is a South suburban Chicago orchestra, and they were pretty good. And I left myself some room to improvise in each movement, and I had a big cadenza in the first movement.
Yeah.
Now, I was terrified when the cadenza happened because I'm used to playing cadenza when 3 or 4 people stop, not when 40 or 50 people stop. My knees were shaking. And so for the following performances, I practiced, okay, I need to have some concrete ideas about what I'm going to play in my cadenza. Eventually, I ended up performing my concerto about 30 or 40 times all over the world, and with a much better orchestra in Chicago called the Chicago Sinfonietta, conducted by Paul Freeman, who also conducted the Czech National Symphony in Prague. And he invited me to record with them. He said the string players are great, and it's affordable. And so I ended up recording it there, I think 2004. And eventually I remixed it and mastered it and put it out on the CD along with my chamber suite and a Piazzolla duo written for guitar and flute that I ended up playing on harmonica with a great marimba player.
Oh, wow.
It's really, really beautiful sounding. So I'm very proud of this CD, and it took a lot of doing to put all the pieces
together. I can
together.
imagine, Man. Amazing, man.
So it's just, my career has been a combination of all of these different elements, and then the teaching thing also.
That's a different story. Yeah.
Because I always gave lessons, and harmonica players were always super curious as to how I do what I do. So I'm happy to share the knowledge. What am I going to say? No, I'm not going to tell you. And so, my techniques, which became known as overblowing and overdrawing, because I gave him that name. It's a terrible name, but I asked a saxophone player, and he said, it sounds like you're overblowing harmonics, which is not what you're doing at all, but that ended up being what they're called. And I put out some instructional videos, one in the 90s on Homespun, and then one on my own around 2006 called Out of the Box Volume 1, where I played tunes in all 12 keys that I wrote.
That's where you play Amazing Grace and stuff on it?
No,
that's not the one, right?
No,
where you play blues, right?
I wrote 10 original tunes and then two blues pieces.
Oh, okay.
In all 12 keys. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a
I saw stuff on YouTube. I think I saw some blues pieces. I don't know if that's the same DVD or.
maybe.
Yeah.
There's two blues in very unusual keys.
Yeah.
So, nobody had ever really done this before, playing in D flat and E
Yeah.
flat and B major on a C harmonica, stuff like that. And I made all these tunes playable. I didn't want to say, I can do it and you can't.
Yeah.
No, the whole idea is that, yes, this can be done, and here's how I do it. And so when you ask about why I compose and how, these pieces were written specifically for this project. And I wrote all of them in the 2 weeks before.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was funny because I forgot two keys for some reason. And I ended up doing two that are just audio. They're like very common keys. And I just somehow or other only wrote tunes in 8 keys and then blues in 2 of them. So the one that's in G and the one that's in D, G and G major and D major are just audio. And
Oh,
but there's a second layer of the DVD where I explain how the music works, how I wrote it, how I play it, and there's notation and play along tracks for 7 of them, I think.
oh.
So it's really great. And
How do you usually start? Like, I mean, your tunes are sometimes like as if, I don't know, Bud Powell meets John Wayne or someone. It's just like, I don't, in a good sense, I mean, but like, it's like you have like a lead sheet and it's like the time signatures are incredible. The harmony is amazing. Of course, you're a piano player. So, I mean, how do you approach? Do you come from harmony or from melody first, or?
it really depends on the individual piece. Sometimes I'll come up with a melody on the harmonica, let's say, and then I'll harmonize it on piano.
Oh, okay.
I'll make it more interesting. Or sometimes, there's some interesting harmonies that I'll stumble across on piano and write a melody to it later. Or then sometimes I'll have fragments and realize that they're all part of one piece.
Yeah.
And I remember one day I was sitting in a recording studio in between jingle sessions, and they had a really nice Steinway there. And I started just improvising this one thing. It was like, here it is. It went. I realized it's in 4/4.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but the syncopations are.
It's just groups of 3s and 2s.
Yeah.
That's sort of from the Balkan influence, but a combination of Latin music and Balkan music. And so I ended up writing a piece inspired by looking at a photograph of 2 rivers coming together in National Geographic magazine, the Amazon and the Xingu River. And I called it Amazonas. And it starts like. Anyway, that's my solo piano version, which I've never recorded. But I did record
You
a version
should.
of it. I know I've been meaning to for a long time, but it's so damn hard that I can't get through it. And so I ended up recording it twice on harmonica. And actually, when I quit the Flecktones, one of the first things I started doing is I said, I really have to raise my harmonica playing up to a level where my piano playing is. Like some of the pieces that I've composed that I went, well, this is a piano piece. I can't play it on harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
I have to figure out how. And so this was the first one I started working on, Amazonas. And it ended up, I recorded it in 1998 as part of a little studio session I did with my quartet. And that ended up on a CD of mine called Tango and Jazz.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
There were a bunch of things that I thought were some of the best things I ever recorded, but I couldn't figure out how to release them until I realized in a weird way, they went together. And so these Piazzolla tangos, which I performed with string quintet and string orchestra a bunch of times, these were some of the best performances I did with the same group that I did my chamber suite with, the Rembrandt musicians.
Yeah.
And so Amazonas was recorded with my quartet on harmonica. And then I also recorded it with Anthony Molinaro, the amazing pianist that I used to join.
Such a good duo.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, yeah, it's, just, that's what I mean. I lost my chance at the sort of the big record contract situation, and it's my own fault. But it's not like I didn't do anything. I ended up doing all sorts of other things, starting my record label and collaborating with all sorts of people on their labels or on my label, and putting out music that I'm really, really proud of. My label, for all of your friends in Slovenia, it's called Balkan Samba Records.
Yeah.
And there's a really funny story behind that, is that it's the name of my BMI music publishing company, as you know, because we collaborated on a tune on our album. And I didn't want that name. I listed a bunch of really hip, cool names. And this is back in the early 80s or something, when I needed to have a publishing company so the record labels could pay me. I had stuff on them. And everything was done by mail. And so you mailed in this form to BMI and, give us a bunch of names. And so I had the hip names. And then as a joke, my last one was Balkan Samba Music, because I loved Balkan music and Brazilian music. And I got the letter back a few weeks later. Congratulations, you are now Balkan Samba Music BMI. And I went, no, it's a joke. And so when I started my record label, I thought, oh, there's a cool name. Oh, it's taken. There's a cool name. Now you're searching online, right? You find out right away. Damn, all the cool names are gone. I know a name I can use. Nobody else has. So I called my record label the same name as my publishing company, and which sometimes is confusing. But now I have 13 CDs on my label, I think.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And because I started finding the older stuff that was
That's
wonderful.
great, yeah.
And I just put out another one in this coronavirus era that we had to cancel the CD release concert, and it's an concert I played with fantastic jazz mandolinist named Jethro Burns in 1983. I found the cassette, and it sounds so wonderful. It looks like this.
I'll have to check this out.
It's the only photograph we could find, and on the back cover is the original cassette.
Oh, wow, how cool.
Yeah, it says...
So you worked on it, and you kind of made the sound better, and...
Yeah, we remastered
it.
And it also includes all of Jethro's spoken introductions, because he was hilariously funny. He was as good of a comedian as he was.
I have to check this out later.
And so we're playing all these like jazz and swing standards, and with a great rhythm guitarist and a great bass player.
Yeah, wow.
So
speaking of Anthony before Molinaro, right? I was listening like these days to you a lot, and there's one tune like in 1908 or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1908, Anthony's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to remember that.
And one question that popped up.
Yeah.
Like also when we were playing, you're like, you breathe on harmonica, so you basically have to play like a saxophone player, but you think like a piano player. So how do you? But you do so much heavy music, right? I mean, your music is quite complex, like harmonically and rhythmically. Also with Trio Globo, like I don't know, giant steps in 7 and all kinds of funny things happening. And how do you approach improv on such music?
Well, I mean, you have to build up a vocabulary in odd time. And so I've actually written a book about this.
Okay.
which I have to finish putting all the examples into Finale so we can publish it. But I don't know if you can see it.
Damn, Howard, we need this.
And I did a lecture on this. It's My Method Volume 1, Expanding Your Improvisational and Compositional Vocabulary by Combining Scales, Modes, and Rhythms. And there's a simpler title to it. But I presented a workshop, maybe 3 hours long, at a music conservatory in Hamburg last year. And it went over really well. And basically, you just have to develop a vocabulary in these different time meters so that they start feeling as normal as 4 and 3.
Yeah.
And they're all just combinations of 2s and 3s anyway. And so, whether they're fast odd time meters or slow ones, the simplest thing I can tell you is, for example, 7. We have 7 notes in a scale. So if you practice, you're just in 7/8. You can't make a mistake. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. So you do that in all 12 keys, and you do that in all 7 Greek modes in all 12 keys, and then you do it in all 7 modes of a melodic minor in all 12 keys. And then you start doing stuff like instead of 1 2 da 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 da, everyone does that. Do these in odd time meters, and play all the silly little pattern exercises that everyone learns how to play on their instruments, but do them in 7 5 9 11 7 4 7 8. All the different kinds. So like if you're in 7 4, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. You can't miss. And then all of these different scales, if you're in 11, for example, the Bulgarian 11, 2 2 3 2 2, 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2. You just go as far as it takes you, and then go up one note and turn around and come back. So this builds up confidence in a musician where he won't get lost. So eventually the idea is to combine together all the different elements of rhythm, scales, melodies, and harmony. But you have to work on these things. And then, of course, for me, playing with people from different cultures and having to perform on stage this stuff also was a tremendous learning experience. Playing Brazilian music, Afro-Cuban music, Bulgarian music, Middle Eastern music, playing with Rabi Abu Khalil, some of the rhythms that he wrote in. Torturous rhythms.
I know that CD. That's amazing. That album. That's like
Odd Times. Yeah, that was.
Odd Times.
He gave me all the hardest solos. Stuff in 17 and 25, and so it's like, I can do that. And so, but also studying Indian music has been a tremendous help to me. Learning about tihais and chakradars from playing with Indian musicians. I actually have a tune like that on the album that I did with Michael Riesler and Jean-Louis Matinier called Silver and Black on Enja. It was a bass line that I wrote when I was 17. That's in 9. Oh, did I play this with you?
I don't think so. Oh, no, you did. You did. Yeah. Sure.
And so I started doing this. I came up with this bass line just sitting in the back of a bus one day when I was in high school. And I had just started listening to Latin music, and I went, "Oh, what a cool bass line!" And then I realized it wasn't in 4, and so I started writing things that would fit, like that, little figures like that, and this one too. And so I didn't know I was using Indian rhythmic principles to do things like that, where you repeat a figure 3 times, and the last note is the first note of the next bar.
Yeah.
It's called the tihai. I didn't know, but I intuitively just it's like a little simple math formula. And then as I played it for more years, I started writing more elaborate ones, and realizing that I was onto something here. You know.
Yeah, that we're there.
So we played all this stuff together.
Yeah, we played this. Yeah, we played this.
And so that's been a lot of fun for me to have these ostinato bass lines that I can just improvise anything on. You know. You know, it's like,
that's cool.
you know, this is sort of locked into something, I don't know what. And Anthony does very similar things with ostinatos that are more complicated. The one in 19, my God. And, yeah, we had another one we collaborated on that's in 9. And I had a harmonica riff that I played that he ended up playing in the left hand of the piano. I probably can't play it on piano. I've never tried. But he has this amazing classical technique. You know, he won the Naumburg competition playing Schoenberg Piano Concerto. You know, so he could play anything. You know, so I so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know, so it's 9, 4, and 16th notes. And he ended up playing that with one hand. You know, in the left hand while he improvised over it in the right hand.
Jeez.
I'll send you. We never put it out, but there's a really good live version of it. I'll send you an MP3.
Yeah. Oh yeah, please. Wow, amazing. But so one last question, so that I don't keep you too long. But how come then you came back to the Flecktones?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, Bela asked me if I would do a tour, and I really wasn't sure. To me, you know, these things are tricky, having reunions. Do I really want to go back?
Yeah, that's why, yeah.
Like, you know, jumping into the river, it's not the same stream twice. And thank God for that, because everybody grew, everybody has matured, everyone can play better. And it felt really good. And we all got along really well because I knew that this time it wasn't like, this is something I'm going to be doing the rest of my life. This is something, well, here's one little tour and and then do you want to do the album and you want to tour for a year? And that was tricky. It was like, that took me a while. And I went, well, it's going to pay really well.
But no, come on, you made amazing music also, so it's like.
And I really like playing with these guys, and we all get along. And so, you know, and I was writing more of the stuff.
Yeah.
So, and you know, in the beginning, it wasn't as democratic, and that was part of the problem for me. And everybody is just, you know, everyone matured a lot, and it was a pleasure. I don't think we had one argument in the year that we were touring together. It was just wonderful. And we played 130 shows in 11 months. So,
seriously? How is it like to play in a band like this? Because in terms of, let's say, jazz, you're kind of like superstars, right? In the States, or
yeah. I mean, audiences go crazy. They start cheering before you walk on stage. I mean, it's like a rock and roll thing, even though the music we're playing is like incredibly sophisticated and, you know, all sorts of wild time meters. But people love it. I mean, the tune that I won a Grammy for on that album that I co-wrote with Bela, I wrote most of the melodic material, actually. It's called Life in 11, and a lot of it is it's in all different kinds of 11s. Bela wrote some really cool 11s, and the 11s that I wrote were mostly the Bulgarian 11, and then a slower 11/4 and an 11/2. It's very complicated. People love it. I mean, they like it as much as something 4/4, because they you know, Flecktones always embodied a musical spirit of adventure and also a sense of humor, of not taking ourselves too seriously in the way that would intimidate an audience, you know, or make an audience feel they had to be quiet. I mean, when it's quiet, and when we're having fun and laughing, it's different, you know. So there's a huge range of emotions and colors in the music.
It's present.
And so, and so we did that, and then took a few years off, and then Everyone's real busy with stuff. Victor has an incredible busy career, and Bela is doing, writing concertos and touring with his wife and being in all sorts of other groups, a duo with Chick Corea. I mean, lots of stuff. But we all set aside like 4 weeks a year to do this, and it's great. I mean, our short tours in the summer were wonderful, and then this year we were supposed to do 2 short tours in the spring, and then hello virus, and so they rescheduled it for next spring. But
Okay, hopefully.
I don't even know if it's going to happen. I mean, I'm afraid to go into a store, man. I don't even go shopping. We just order food. So the idea of getting on a plane or being on a tour bus, breathing the same air, and we don't know, like maybe one of us got it, maybe someone who walked in the bus had it. Like,
That's how they
like what's his name? Djokovic thought he would have a nice tennis tour, and you know what happened to that? They all got the virus, man. All these tennis players, these top guys, they thought, oh, what could happen to us? We're so important. The virus doesn't care who you are. So, and now that I'm 95 years old, old, I have to be even more careful. I'm not 23,
Yeah, sure.
So I have to be careful. And also I have a wife who wants me to be very careful.
Yeah.
And so, touring is tricky. So at the present time, I'm just grateful for my Artist Works Harmonica School, and that I'm giving Skype lessons to people, and I'm recording actually a bunch of tracks for people who are sending me stuff, who are going to put things out or who are showing them online. Actually, the last guy who just got in touch with me is Stephen J., who's a fantastic musician who plays bass with Weird Al Yankovic. Yeah, and Stephen is into a lot of the mathematical formulas about music and numbers that I'm into.
Yeah.
And so we met through Victor Wooten. Victor has these bass and nature camps, and now he's doing those online. And so we had a big Zoom session, and I got to hear some of Stephen's music, and it was mind-blowing. So he just sent me a few tracks that he wants me to play harmonica with.
Oh, great.
So, life continues.
Yeah.
And human beings, man, we're flexible. That's why man has survived. If it's cold, you put on more clothes. If it's hot, you take some off. We can't tour. We have to figure out a way of making a living through this virtual universe.
Yeah.
Until it's safe enough to not have to do this.
It's opening some other chances, to cooperate, definitely.
It's frustrating, and it's isolating in a certain way.
Yeah.
But it is also bringing people together in ways that they've never been brought together before.
That's at least good, yeah.
But man, I'm glad that you and I finally got to tour together. I had a fantastic time playing with you.
Yeah, it was amazing, man. My dream come true. I transcribed so many Flecktones and your stuff and everything, so when we got to play together, I was like, and then in the studio, you were so cool. I was like, okay, we're cool. Okay.
Oh, it was great. I mean, great. I really, loved your tunes, and they were not easy for me to play, but I have enough mental power to be able to do it.
We nailed it then. Yeah, it was nice.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Cool, man. Okay. Howard, I'll just stop recording now. So that you want to still say something? No, right? I think we covered it.
Well, I'll just say to everybody who's watching this, wherever you might be, to stay safe and to stay inspired. And music, music is like the blood flowing through our veins. It's part of who we are, and the more you get into it, the more it gives you back. So, just those are my thoughts.
Yeah, man, that's true.